And I want to welcome everybody to the chess career panel. This is the first panel that we're having. We are recording this, so we just want to let you know. If you have comments or questions, we're a small group, so feel free to jump in. And but we will also monitor the chat too. So I want to just quickly introduce our esteemed panel, and then I'll open up with a first question. So Matt Burden is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Porter Stark Services. Jay Jara is the Executive Vice President of Intercontinental Growth Strategies. And Charles Williams is the principal of Plato Learning Academy, founder of CW Consulting, and he is host of the Counter Narrative podcast. So I'm going to open with just one, and they will all respond to the first question. And again, remember, you can ask questions as well as pose them in the chat. So Matt, could you start by sharing a bit about your career path and how it led to your current position?
Sure, thanks, Elaine. Well, hi, everybody. As Elaine mentioned, I'm here at Porter Stark Services, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Porter Stark Services, we are a comprehensive mental health and addictions organization that also provides primary health care. To some extent, we have an inpatient unit that specializes in psychiatric illness, and we have a lot of community-based and residential and school-based programs as well. We have about 300 some employees, so there's a lot of work to do in this field, and I'm happy to be here today. How did I get here? I'm going to be mindful of time because I'm older than I look, or maybe I'm not, I don't know. But I started out, thinking back to undergrad, I was always interested in a lot of different things, and I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. I was convinced in high school that I should go into psychology, but my teacher at the time who taught me psychology said, Matt, you love it too much, do something else, because if you do psychology, you have to be in school forever. So I went off to undergrad, not really sure what I wanted to do. And eventually I decided on psychology and I went to school forever. So I got my master's degree, I got my PhD, I did a couple of postdoctoral fellowships. And I spent a lot of time through this period working at the same time I was going to school. And I had a lot of interesting jobs, whether it was summers or in the different hours where I got to experience both sides of academics and business and industry. I was in Chicago for a long time, and then I was in the Detroit area. And I grew up in LaPorte, Indiana. So I got to a point in my career where I had finally gotten on faculty. And for those in academics, that's a long goal. And it was important for me in my life, but I had a really unique opportunity that came up in my own hometown where I grew up. And they were looking for somebody with just that kind of experience that I had and a community connection. So I took a leap outside of academics and became CEO of Swanson Center in LaPorte County. I was there for about 8.5 years and developed at that time relationships with Porter Stark because not every community mental health center gets along when they're next door to each other, but it happened to be that was the case with us. So it was an opportunity to keep that continuity growing and for me to continue to develop professionally. So that's as short as I can get. If you want more details, I'm happy to answer later, but I'd prefer to pass the torch here.
Thanks, Matt. Jay, could you talk a little bit about your career trajectory and also what you do, because it's fascinating.
Yeah, first off, thank you for having me here. Virtually, can't wait till we can all get together in a one setting. So I left undergrad back in 2005, was wide-eyed, positive, ready to go, right? Had no idea where I was going to go, but I knew wherever I went, I was going to work hard, and I'm passionate and I was going to succeed. So I started in an entry-level sales position working for a telecom company that went public while I was there. I then moved to Detroit. I lived in Detroit for a year, opened up an office in Detroit. From there down to Miami. I'm fluent in Spanish, so opened up an office down South Florida, then moved to DC, all within telecom. I started my career hitting doors, 50 doors a day. Hello, I want to introduce myself to the president, And it was tough, but it's what you did to make a living and then move up and then now where I'm at today. So, from there, when I was in DC, I was getting married. I told my wife, I wanted to focus more instead of opening offices. I wanted to calm down a little bit more and focus more on my family. I left industries. I went into trade credit insurance. So I graduated with a political science degree, but I've always been a business type guy, entrepreneurial type spirit type of person. And credit insurance insures against losses that come from bankruptcy or non-payment. So for example, if you manufacture, I always use this example. I have a roller skate manufacturer as a client, and they sold to Toys R Us. And Toys R Us, who we've all grown up with, the draft, they're no longer there. They filed for bankruptcy. So when he would ship a container of roller skates, they owed him $500,000. So when they filed for bankruptcy, he then took that loss. Well, I insured that loss. I insured that asset, his accounts receivable. So there's a whole industry revolving around accounts receivable insurance, and IGS is a credit insurance brokerage. So when I left DC back almost 10 years ago, I started working for the world's largest trade credit insurance carrier, a French company called Euler Hermes. And then 2 years ago, I came to help take over the brokerage IGS. We're based out of Chicago. We have 2 offices, and we're looking to open up another office down south in Texas. So that's a little bit about my path, multiple industries. But I'm excited to be here and share stories with the team.
It's also interesting to note that you have a degree in political science, but you have worked in business. And I think that's right. What students need to understand is that, you may have a degree and that's the field you work in, but you may have a degree that leads you into another field.
Completely.
Yeah. So thanks, Jay. Charles, could you talk a little bit about your career? Because you did something a little similar to Jay also, where you started in one area and then moved into another.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if my story is exciting, but Jay, that was fascinating. I was like, oh, I didn't even know that such a thing existed. Yeah. So I graduated apparently right behind Jay. I left Purdue in 06. And so I had a degree in communication, and it was just kind of generic. I was a dad early. So I bounced around and kind of took the classes I could to graduate. I knew I wanted to do something in communication. And so I left really wanting to pursue public relations. And so at the job fair, I remember their school city of Hammond was there, I grew up in Hammond. I'm a region rat. And so I said, hey, I would love to come and do PR for you, and I started doing PR. And they were like, okay, can you do English? That was our major. Sure, I can teach English as well. And somewhere along the line, it was like PR and English, and then all of a sudden it was like, all I'm doing is English. So I figured, I fell in love with it, fell in love with teaching. So I went back to school, got my teaching certificate, got a master's in education, because I wanted to be the best in whatever it is that I was doing. And I stayed in education for a while, and eventually I wanted to do much more. I was having some extremely great successes in my classrooms, and I wanted to apply that on a much larger level. So I came back to Purdue, got my master's in educational administration, and became a principal. So I've been a principal for the last 7 years. I'm a principal here in Chicago, at a charter school on the far west side of Chicago. I mean, if you go 2 blocks that way, you're in Oak Park, so about as far west as you can go. But it's been an exciting ride. Most of the time when I talk to people and they ask, about that education trajectory, I had no intentions of becoming a teacher. In fact, in college, I did a lot of sales, sold a bunch of things, even those notorious $1,500 vacuums, those Kirby's, right? And I say, if you can sell those, you can do anything. So, I really come to everything, even though I'm in education, right? I had a background in sales, in communication, and so that has played a large role in what I do now. So I've taken that experience then in education, and I have started hosting workshops, and I do keynote speaking and do consulting for other educational organizations, where is why CW Consulting was formed. And then just again having that, I guess you call it the gift of gab. The podcast has been launched. In fact, next month is a year old, so very excited about that. As well as just something new that has started is an educational show. So there's a web series called Inside the Principal's Office, where we create spaces for educational leaders. So there's a lot of those kind of different facets, right? Leadership and sales and customer service and education all combined has given me this really unique opportunity to do these different things. But first and foremost, I always say I'm an educational leader, love what I've been doing, and just really being able to give back, which is why I'm here with you guys. So that's the sweet condensed version. So thank you for having me here today.
Thanks, Charles. And I like how you combined, your first field with your second areas too. That's really great. So all three of you have hired many people over your career. I've hired many people too over my career, and it's something that as you hire lots of people, you begin to see things and that you're looking for. So I was wondering, and Jay, if you could start us off of talking about when you're hiring somebody, what are some of the skills you're looking for? Some of the skills you have that are unique to your area. What are some of the soft skills, and how do you evaluate somebody as you're moving through a hiring process?
Sure, good question. And prior to coming over to IGS and even being in credit insurance, I hired entry-level positions, weekly. Bi-weekly we'll call it. But it's funny because coming out, putting myself back when I was 22, coming out of school, there's this expectation or stigma that your resume is everything, right? And everything on that resume, you only can qualify whatever employers really fit that category or mold. And as an employer and as a managing director who made these decisions, I made it a point to use the resume more as a guide to the conversation to learn more about the student or the candidate. I'm sorry. And I think what I always looked out for, you want to fit your team, right? So if your team is a high energy, the culture is something where you're going to, work hard and play hard back to the sales role, but you want to fit that mold. But you also want to balance it out to where you're rounded team, excuse me. But there's really two things I always look for. Hard work ethic. You can tell when someone is going to put in the time to work hard, right? And I always found it a point that when I was, just having these conversations to find out what's the motivation behind that candidate, and what am I as their leader? How can I use those motivations or cannot use them, right, to motivate them to maximize their work ethic, and then as they progress through the interview process. So the first thing was high work ethic, and the second is a positive attitude. I'm a firm believer. I'm in credit insurance. No one knows what credit insurance is. Okay, honestly, I'll talk to a treasurer or CFO. I know that when I walk into a room that I have the most knowledge in this field. So when I'm interviewing, I don't really care about the background as much. It's more, okay, can I apply our company culture, the training for this person to maximize their skills and help get the job done for IGS? And that's really the two things: work ethic and a positive attitude, making sure that they fit and that they're going to handle the rigor of the job. So yeah, those are probably the two things I really look for.
Sorry, I was muting myself. Charles, so thank you so much, Jay. Charles, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I would absolutely agree with Jay. some of the things, so I mentioned earlier, that I spent a lot of time in sales and customer service and things like that. And so I think one of the things is, regardless of what field you're in, you have to have those skills, right? You need to be able to interact with people. And so especially at a school, like, I need to know that you're going to be able to interact with parents and with our other stakeholders, our students, right? That you're going to be able to build those relationships and to be able to navigate those spaces. So I'm going to try to gauge that, right? You don't have to be over the top extroverted. Even the most introverted people can do that. That's one of the things that I would be looking for. Obviously, in the field of education, I need to know that the content, right? I mean, that is the one thing that's what you do as a teacher. We are teaching these standards, we are teaching these skills. So I need to know that you are current with that, because one of the things within education is, I'm sure with other fields, is that it's consistently changing. So, if you're coming in and just throwing buzzwords at me, like, that doesn't tell me anything. I want to know that you truly understand this. And that you're up to date. So, for example, one of the things, right, we are shifting more towards this holistic approach to student-centered education, and I want to hear that. Like, if you're coming in and you're like, it's my classroom, where like you're not going to fit. Kind of going back to what Jay said, is that get to know the culture of the place that you're going into, because I'm going to see if you're going to fit into that. And I'll just be honest, and this is just maybe something that we do in the space that I'm in. I don't want saviors. And this is maybe just something in education. Like, I don't need you to come in and save my students. Like, yes, I want to know what you're going to be able to bring. I want to know how we can help you learn and grow, especially for the second part of the question about the career advancement. I want to know that I'm hiring a learner, somebody who's going to be committed. Like, yes, you're done with school, but you're not, right? You are going to stay current. And so those are a few of those things that I'm looking for. I want to know that you're going to fit. I want to know that you're going to be able to build those relationships and rock it out with your students, and that you have that content. And in addition to everything else that Jay has said, and I'm sure that Matthew's going to add on.
Thank you, Charles. So Matt, when you're hiring, what are some of the important skills that you're looking for? And obviously, we're also talking about attitude too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and both Charles and Jay alluded to this as well. It's those soft skills, as you, I think, mentioned, Elaine, are really vital. In fact, when Elaine shared with us some of the questions that we may be asked during this, and I wrote two of those things: communication and customer service are huge. So as an organization like ours, there are many positions where you have to have very, very specific experience and credentials. Which can be frustrating, especially even people who have worked here for a long time. If you have a bachelor's degree, there are just certain things that you won't be able to do until you get a master's. And then when you get that master's degree, there are certain things you can't do until you get a certain licensure, and on and on and on. So some of those prerequisites can be frustrating, but I can tell you, no matter what, as you work your way up the ladder, if you don't have those customer service and communication skills, it's going to be hard to go anywhere. People can be really good at doing their job, but not always communicating that. So I suggest, whether it's an interview or whatever you're going to do when the time comes, is practice what you're going to say. Spend a little time, especially if you haven't had a lot of time giving speeches or talking in public. Get your thoughts and ideas together and be comfortable saying them, and be comfortable writing them as well. Writing. Most of the problems we experience when there's any kind of conflict, at least at our organization, has to do with, it almost always boils down to some communication that wasn't clearly communicated or clearly perceived. And you can trace a lot of problems. So the better you are at getting the information across the first time the right way, that's an essential skill, and it's something we really look for when hiring.
So as a humanist, you are all singing my song, talking about writing, communication, and research, and practicing that, right? And that's something I think is really important, that we all practice what we're doing. It's not something that, we graduated from college and we immediately had all those skills. It's something we practiced over time and continue to practice. And so I like that your responses, and I'm also thinking about one of the things you've talked about is is a fit with your organization. And fits can sometimes be that you have to have certain skills. A fit can also be those soft skills. But also, you know, one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize, and I think as you're working, and Jay, you and Matt really talked about this, was that fit of wanting certain things in your own life and looking for a position that fit you well. And Charles, you also mentioned this. So Charles, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you know, students might decide, or anyone might decide, what's an organization that's a good fit for them personally and professionally. And also maybe, and this might include, you know, questions about or, you know, a fit regarding diversity. It might be ethics, values. It may be career trajectory. You know, if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was just having this conversation yesterday, and so one of the first things I would recommend is identifying your own core values. Like, you need to know what you believe in and what you stand in, because if you go into a place and you don't know what you believe in, what you stand in, then everything's going to be a good fit, right? Because you don't have your own space. So identify that first. Once you know that, then begin doing your research and finding companies that, you know, whatever, when you're online or however you're going to do it, to see if they're matching. But the one thing that I would definitely recommend, and this is something that I was actually talking with teacher candidates yesterday. So two things. One is flip the script, flip the interview. Start asking those questions. Most of us, as we're interviewing, we love what we're doing, and so we are going to love to talk about our company. And so try to find out, like, why are we here? Like, why is Jay selling this weird insurance that nobody has heard of, right? Like, why is Matt a CEO of this company? Like, find out why we are doing what we're doing, to find out whether or not this is going to be a good fit for you. And the second thing, and this is just specifically for education, because this is where I'm from, ask for the opportunity to spend time beyond the interview. Like, I don't want to just sit and talk to you, because those 30 minutes, 90 minutes, whatever, yes, we are saying be prepared, kind of have your scripted responses ready, but I want to know what I'm seeing is something that I'm going to see after you're hired. So spend some time, because I know for me as a teacher candidate, if you're in my building and you're having lunch with first graders, it's going to tell me a lot about you, right? I'm going to watch how you're interacting with potential colleagues, right? And so I think not just for me to be able to see that, but for you to say, yeah, this is a good fit for me, because interviews are two-way streets. And I think a lot of times we go in just to sell ourselves, but you have to make sure that you are getting a good feel for what it is. And if it doesn't fit you, walk away. And you have to be doing that. That is my biggest thing, because it may look great, it may be a lucrative position, it may have a great salary, but if you're going to be miserable, is it really worth it? So make sure that you know your core values and do whatever you can to identify whether or not that place is going to match your core values.
Thank you, Charles. Matt, would you like to address the aspect of fit and values?
Sure. Yeah, it's the other thing in addition to that is a lot of companies, ours included, have a formal mission, vision, and values. And it's either, if it's not posted out on their website or something, at our orientation, that's actually something I go through with staff as my piece. We actually do a 2-day orientation, which not every business does, and it gives a sense of everything that happens across the department. But of course, you find that out after you're hired. So the more you can find out ahead of time, the better. So I really, really encourage researching the company that you're looking into. And there are different ways to do it, and you should do all of them. Look at what's in the news about them. Look at their website. Look at their Facebook page. And, you know, read reviews, but just keep a little skepticism sometimes, because sometimes the people who comment aren't always the people who are the happiest after they've left. You know, if you ever read into the bottoms of articles, sometimes there's some very unhappy people. Now, sometimes there's happy people as well. But, you know, it's important to know that some of the isolated views out there aren't always representative. And you should at least take a big breadth of a look at that. And I think the way to do that is, it's also very impressive to people in the organization when you know about what they're doing. The more you can understand. And there's a variety of things. We hire a lot of people. We actually hire about 70 to actually now closer to 80 to 90 people per year, because our industry turnover is around 30%. So we lose 70 to 80 people a year to retirement, to other jobs, to moving. And some of those are, it's a tough job. I mean, honestly, it's a mental health business, and not everybody is equipped to do it. But we try to do everything we can to support staff once they're here. That's part of our culture. And most people that you would ask, I think they would say that about Porter Stark. So the more you can find out from people who know and who are credible sources, the better. But get a variety of them so you feel comfortable with it.
Thank you, Matt. Jay, could you talk a little bit about, and again, you're in another, a different field too, and a little bit about fit and values, whether for someone who's looking to work with you or also within your organization.
Sure. And, I echo those same sentiments as Matthew and Charles. As a candidate, and it's hard, especially entry level, right? Because you feel like, oh, the job market's so tight, which isn't true. Everyone's hiring. Everyone's looking for good talent. Let me repeat that. Everyone is looking for good talent. Honestly, we all know that here on the panel, right? And you have to take the mindset of you're interviewing the employer just as much as they're interviewing you, right? And the research, how great is it when you get a good candidate, when they do research on you, on the company, it's different, right? You're not getting the canned plastic answers, and that is a good way to separate yourself from the talent pool, right? Is do your research. Matthew, when you mentioned writing things down, I couldn't agree for more with that statement, because it's so important. And I used to, even like my brothers and my sisters, I'm one of the oldest, I'd always tell them, hey, before you go in that office building or whatever, look in the mirror and say, I'm going to make this happen, right? Have confidence in yourself. You're graduating from Purdue Northwestern, giving you the tools to go on to the next level, right? Be confident in what you can do. There's a reason why they accepted you as a candidate, right? This is your time to shine. And don't just take the first job. I'm guilty. I took the first job and I was like, what am I doing here? This is nuts, right? So, and I know that's difficult. I'm a first generation, Mexican-American. My parents were expecting me to get a job the second I graduated. And I was like, so I had that pressure, right? But, and that doesn't just apply to being first generation, anything. There's a lot of first generation college students out there that are at your school, right? Doesn't matter what color you are. If you have the work ethic, the drive, and you're organized and do some research, you'll find the best opportunity for what you're looking for.
And I think that's great. The idea too is sometimes your first job, it's almost like it helps you get the next job, and you're learning and you're accumulating that experience, and you're constantly taking and moving on, but you have that, you learn a lot of different, learn about different tools, because sometimes in one job you're introduced to certain things that you might not use in the next job, but you could. And then you're also learning different skills as you're moving on. My first job in education, I taught in students who were in detention centers, and so they were juvenile delinquents, and that's probably wasn't the best way to go into education, because they were an interesting group, but I really found that I could connect with them. I enjoyed that. And I learned some things about classroom management that I have been able to use throughout my whole entire career. And I have never taught in a prison setting or a detention center again, but I learned some things that have been very effective. And part of that is listening, understanding, saying, I hear you, but we're not going to do that, or just whatever. And you learn some things along the way. But one of the things that students always ask is they ask specific questions. And this is always an interesting one, because it does differ in the disciplines. So this question about resumes, lengths of resumes, what should be on the resume. And since all of you are in different areas, I'd like for you to talk about that. I am, in higher education, my resume looks, and I have a CV, a curriculum vitae, that looks very different from my husband's resume. He's an architectural engineer, he's an architect, and his looks dramatically different from, say, somebody who would be in business. So if you could talk a little bit, maybe not only at entry level, but how that changes as your career advances in your particular area. So Matt, could you kick us off? And then Jay and Charles, if you can follow up.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So this is, I also had a CV at one point, which I quit updating a long time ago because I was in academics, and it was a little bit of a relief, frankly, but here's what I would say. I've got actually several pieces of advice for you on this, is always keep your old resumes, okay? Put a date on it whenever you update it. I mean, if you update just a tiny bit within a year, but every year I force, and this is something that I used to not like doing that now I kind of enjoy, because once you build it, update it every single year. What I have now is I have a 3-page resume, and the 3rd page is a bunch of committees and other things like that are there. And I spend the first 2 pages on my career. So what you should do in this case is think of your audience. You want to be able to tell your story. The reason I started saying what Porter Stark Services is because there's a lot of people that don't know. Even if you live here, sometimes if you haven't had experiences for mental health and addictions, you don't know what it is. So if you have a resume and you have a position that is not 100% clear, make sure you describe something about that so the reader knows what it is that you are doing, what you've done, and then try to focus on a couple of key things that you've done. Something that shows how you've learned from that, something that shows what you've accomplished in that. And you try to make this then more concise with time. So when I was young, I was very proud of my GPA, for instance, but my GPA hasn't been on my resume for many, many years, because at some point, it's like, do I really have to go back that far now? You kind of build over time. So continually look at what's relevant to today. And it's become kind of a fun exercise, actually, for me to look each year to think, what key pieces am I going to put in? What am I going to rewrite without retelling the story, right? And that's why I always keep past resumes as well, because you want to have that career detail somewhere, but it's not always relevant. And some things, even that I once thought were irrelevant, may become relevant again, depending on what you're doing, where you're going. So it's another good reason to think about those things. Just one more thing I want to say, because I could talk a lot about this, but make sure, this is vitally important, don't exaggerate and don't lie, okay? Ever in your resume. There are people who have gone 20, 30 years, it's discovered, and their career is ruined. There's no point. Tell the truth, have it be clear, have it be concise, and if there are gaps or other things that you don't like, just have an explanation that's a reasonable one. But I think it's very important to be authentic and to be honest and to say what it is, whatever it is, because everybody knows people experience good and bad things in their life. It's how you present it, it's how you handle it, that's what really stays.
Thank Matt. I think that's really great, the idea, and I think it's, I'd like to reiterate is, always be honest in your resume, and explaining the gaps. It's okay. It's okay to explain gaps. And I think you're right. Your career changes over time. You may have things that happen in your personal life that force you to step out, but to be authentic and to be honest. Jay, what in your, because you're in a completely different field from Matt. So what does, and again, we're not going to share resumes, but what does your resume look like, and what are you looking for maybe in an entry level versus a more senior position?
Sure. On the entry level, I like there's only so much you can put on, right? You worked at the Wendy's and managed the milkshake machine during college. I mean, we're not going to really get detailed on that, right? But I like the extracurriculars, right? I like the awards, the GPA, right? To me, what's more important yet, everyone's proud of their GPA, but what else do you do? Are you involved with the community? Do you give back? Do you participate in some kind of a club function or a sports function of some sort? you know, because the positions that I'm hiring for, I want, you know, someone that can adapt in networking settings and go out on a lunch or go out at a dinner, so on and so forth, and feel comfortable in those type of situations. So from an entry level perspective, I like some of the extracurriculars. On a seasoned level, you know, when we're hiring credit insurance professionals, you know, we like the details. We like the wins. We want to, you know, we actually put an NDA in place prior to receiving a resume because there's some confidential information and some strong relationships that we're interviewing the candidate, but we really want to know about those relationships and that book of business as we acquire that agent. So it's important, to Matt's point, keep it concise, right? Explain the gaps. You know, in our space, you know, we'll come across a lot of entrepreneurial type candidates that may have gone out on their risk. And I remember specifically interviewing someone who's on my team today who started his own sort of software company and failed. And I just asked him what was the gap in the resume, and that was it. And I cared more about that story than anything else he'd done, right? Because that's telling, right? And I think it's also important, looking at this from an interviewer's perspective, is ultimately what an employer wants. They want to get you to your rawest emotion type. They want to get you off your script because it's scripted. We all know for the most part it's scripted. They want to get to know who you are, because when push comes to shove, and we've all been there, when you have an employee where there's either an issue or a win, high or low, you want to see the reaction. You want to see how they're going to adapt and contribute to the team. So that's my sort of take on the resume sort of structure.
Thanks, Jay. I really like the conversation too about that aspect, that stepping out. Somebody can have a really great story that says so much about who they are and what they can contribute. And you never get that unless you ask. And so being open to that by putting in your resume opens the door to kind of having that engagement. Charles, could you talk a little bit about what you're looking for? And again, different field from Matt and Jay.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's, especially at the entry level, a lot of it is going to be very similar. And so I did want to point out, so I know Matt said never lie, never exaggerate, but for those of you, anybody born after 2006, in 2006, we were all named Time Person of the Year. So you could legally put that down. No, I'm joking, don't do that. But you know, I'm looking for those things on there. Like, did you do, for me, for education, like, did you do student teaching? Where did you do it? Like, what is your focus in? I want to know that you have some exposure. Like, unlike a lot of entry level jobs where you're kind of learning on the job, I can't have you in front of students for the very first time ever when you take control of a classroom. Like, I need to know that you've had some experience running a classroom, whether it was through student teaching or whatever. I also agree with those extracurriculars because I want to know what you're bringing, right? As we've said before, it's not just about teaching the content, but it's about being able to create this holistic experience for students. So what can you bring into this space that we can utilize as we are growing and building young people, right? If you've had, I don't know, like maybe, I don't know, like time spent on a farm or something, like, well, that's great in urban education because my kids probably have never seen it. So, you know, share those little tidbits. The one thing that I'm going to say is that I want to get beyond that piece of paper because like Jay was very honest with this. Resumes are going to try to give me what I want to see and hear, right? And that's good to identify people immediately, but it's not going to make you stand out necessarily. So with the invention, with all this access to tech, throw something else in there. Give me a QR code that I can scan and let me see you in your student teaching. Like, let me see you in action. Because now I'm going to get to know you a little bit better. And again, that's just another piece of evidence that you know how to think beyond the box and that you're going to probably take some innovative approaches when you're working with our students. So I want to get to know you, whether it's in the interview or even before, ideally. I don't want to just look at a piece of paper. And please, and I'm just going to recommend, please don't do those gimmicky things like, throw your paper on some weird construction paper or spray it with perfume. It doesn't work. I'm going to be like, what is this? So be honest, be concise as possible, but find a way to tell your story. And I agree with what came before me. I want to know who is behind this piece of paper.
Again, I think that's, all the responses are really great, just about telling your story but also, those additional tidbits, using a QR code, having things that you can really enhance your resume that don't actually have to be in the resume. You can think in creative ways, but like you said, not perfuming your resume or whatever. Although we do know that if you're in some of the more artistic fields, you really do have to up your game. And architecture is one of those things that it's all about the aesthetic too, because if you can't display that at the first entry, then that might hinder, moving forward. So again, you want to research what your resumes might look like in a particular field, and keep that in mind. The other thing I think is really important too, that we've been talking about is, and this was mentioned before, in being in fields that have turnover or high levels of fatigue. I wanted you to also address things, as your career is progressing and advancing, there are, that you are going to encounter times where you might feel some burnout. Some fields have it more than others, and have greater turnover. And how do you deal with that? How do you deal, at the entry level? What are some of the things you did versus, also as you're progressing in your career, how you might kind of re-energize within your own field? So Jay, could you talk a little bit about that to start us off?
Sure. I had a conversation like this a little over a year ago, prior to COVID, where a friend of mine got an offer to make a little bit more money, but work from home versus driving to the city every day. But he loved his job. Great culture, had been there for 5, 6 years. And it's just really simple. I think we fall into that mold sometimes, that routine, that everything is the way it is today and it doesn't change, it won't change, right? Whether it's work-life balance, upward mobility, whatever it is within the organization. But it's important that once you get a job and you feel comfortable and you're growing, it's important to keep that open dialogue with your superior, right? The owner of the company, the boss, your management, whatever it is, because they value. Don't forget, there's such value in talent from an employer. In my opinion, this is the way I've always sort of conducted my business. I have such value and importance on my team that I need to make sure I create that relationship to where we're open, to where I get a random text message where we might have all gotten already. Hey, on a Friday at 4:00, hey, are you available to talk? Something's wrong, right? And then you're thinking, shoot, are they leaving? Did they get an offer, another job, this and that? But you want to have that. You want to have that openness, and it's a two-way street. So for those of you that are on here that are looking to get your first job, second job, whatever it is, try to build that relationship so that when you do feel burnt out or there is another opportunity, you can easily go to your employer, your team, say, hey, this is the situation. I love being here, but X, Y, and Z. What can you do, right? Because I guarantee it, if they're a good organization, they will accommodate you, because the cost to replace an employee, we all know, is close to 6 to 7 times more than retaining that employee. And no one wants to deal with that, especially with the talent shortage that there is right now. So that's sort of my opinion on that.
Great, thanks, Jay. Charles?
Yeah, so he took one of my points, which is that open and honest communication, even though it does freak me out when any of my teachers, which I think it's only when I say it to them, like, hey, can I see you in my office? Like when they're like, hey, can I talk to you? I'm like, oh, right. But definitely, so one of the other things is definitely use your mental health days. And if your company offers them, they're there for a reason. And I tell my staff all the time, like, you have your days, use your days. Do not feel like you have to be obligated to come in, because I'd rather you be at your best, right? And then I know there's lots of quotes and things out there, and I wish I like had one geared up, ready to go, but I need you at your best. And so I'd rather you take a day and come back and be amazing than just kind of pushing through and being average. So don't be afraid to take the days that are made available to you. And I think the other side of this, and this is really important for entry level, or you're starting off, it's okay not to know. Recognize your strengths and your weaknesses. You're not going to be good at everything. I'm not expecting you to be good at everything. So if you're struggling with something, and this goes back to Jay's point, talk to me about that. Let's figure out how to work in that area. Because if you are afraid of saying that, of admitting I need help, it's not going to do anybody any good, right? You're going to burn yourself out trying to figure it out on your own. I'm going to see you as an incompetent employee because I'm just thinking you don't know what you're doing, right? We need to have those conversations. So recognize what you're struggling with, be open and honest about it. And then the last one, just use those days, take that time. One more, I guess. Teachers are notorious for never to stop working, right? Ever, right? Even though it's like, oh yeah, you guys get summers off. Like, no, we don't. But have those definitive kind of boundaries. Like, at a certain point, work is done, and that is okay. Like, and I'm sure the three of us are employers who will say that to you, but figure it out. Like, when work is done, work is done. Step away, do for you. Find a way to refill yourself before you start up the next day. So those are my things.
Thank you, Charles. Matt?
Thanks. So it's hard to add on to all those great thoughts, but one thing that we do here, there's a lot of burnout in healthcare, in general, with mental health care as well, as we do spend a lot of time emphasizing self-care. And what specifically are you doing? What is it? Family? Is it activities? How can you get away? And so I like to always think of this as the inverted U curve of stress. Does everybody know that? Okay, so I say, try to live your life at the top of that curve, right? Because as your stress goes up, your performance goes up to a point. Then as your stress continues, your performance goes down. So you want to live your life on the top of that inverted U. You can apply that to so many things. I use it always as an analogy to things. Because if you're finding yourself, usually you can find yourself on one side or the other. You're not motivated enough, you're not doing enough, or you're so stressed that you have to recognize your performance isn't optimal. That's the optimal point, is at the top of that curve.
Thank you. I mean, that's true. There is this aspect of motivation and really, seeking opportunities, but also change and pursuing them. I just want to open it up. We're getting towards the end of our time, and open it up to any questions that people might have who are in the Zoom room.
And never be shy with questions. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask something, but I forgot.
Jacob, do you have a question? I couldn't hear you that well.
Yeah, I had a question, but then I forgot.
Oh, you did?
Because I got a class soon at 12:30, and I'm kind of focusing on that right now.
Okay. Well, we'll have this on the Bright Space for you to see it.
Yeah.
Later. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for joining us.
I'm
really interested in Jay, because he went into business, and that's kind of what I'm thinking about right now. And Jay's story.
Okay.
Yeah, I found that interesting. So what made you choose your line of work specifically?
To Elaine's point earlier, I mean, you very rarely do you choose your line of work. It almost.
I mean, yeah, that is true. But like, what attracted you to business as compared to something else?
Yeah, good question. So, I grew up in a small business. My father owned a body shop, and I liked how he just interacted with the people. I had no idea about any of the money, any of the costs for his suppliers, the fact that he was actually getting paid, right? I just remember being at his shop, him having the relationships, him going out, looking, buying parts. And I liked that aspect. I liked the idea of someone coming into the business, needing something, and my dad being able to provide it for them. So I've always liked that. I liked being the champion of someone's problem.
Mm.
That was really what intrigued me, really in business. That really was it.
Yeah, I kind of attracted to business myself. I do enjoy selling stuff. When I was in Boy Scouts, I got a note from like the association because I was the scout who sold the most popcorn out of like, because Boy Scout popcorn and like
Yeah.
rarely Scouts participate in them. I sold over $1,000 worth of popcorn, and I would usually volunteer at this one fundraiser specifically so I could sell candies and sweets and whatnot. But the problem is that I'm selling stuff and other people are profiting from it. So I kind of want like a job where I can fill that role and make actual money.
Sure. Well, keep that story. Make sure you share that story, because everyone in leadership, especially in business, has a similar story. So when you were selling popcorn, I was selling the world's finest chocolates, right? So remember that.
All right.
Great. That's a great story. Yeah, having this narrative of how you're interested and have done it over time. I don't know if anyone else has another question. Yeah, Paul.
So I was interested in the part of your career. First of all, thank you so much for sharing this with P&W and with our students. And I'm as soon as this recording is up, I'm going to post it on everywhere and try to get students to watch it. But the part I wanted to ask about was a little bit more about the college experience. And I mean, I think it's extremely instructive to hear about how your different backgrounds informed or didn't inform your careers, and how the farther along you get, the sort of less important the specifics are. But when students are like in their first or second year, and then they're first generation students, they don't really know their way around that well. So they don't know the meaning of different majors and disciplines that well. And they're also struggling to find motivation just in college, right? Because I mean, I think all of you seem to indicate that it's a good idea to try to do well in college, right? I mean, you want to be able to talk about some positive things that happened in your college education when you're in an interview. So I wonder if you have anything to say about how to find the motivation while you're sort of searching as a college student and finding your way around.
Charles, would you like to begin, or someone could just motion to? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I think it all depends, right? Like I mentioned, I was a single dad of 2 kids. So that was a pretty big motivator for me to go find a job. And I love the fact that we give advice, and most of the time it's advice that we're giving because it's like, let us make the mistakes for you, right? Because I told you I was selling Kirby's for a while, right? Like that was not an ideal job. So I think the one thing is kind of trying to figure out what is it that you want to do, right? Trying to figure that out. As I mentioned earlier, kind of what are my core values, right? Who am I as a person, which may shift a little bit over time, but where is it that I would like to be? I can say that when I entered into the teaching force, I said, I'm going to be an administrator by the time I'm 30. I set that goal right away. And then I just worked towards that and I did it, right? So I think it's one of those things that you always have to have a goal in place to say, I know where I'm going. Because if you're just kind of moving along for the ride, I mean, you're going to end up somewhere, but it may not be where you want. So figure out what it is that you want and actively work towards that thing.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Charles. Matt, would you like to respond? And then Jay?
Yeah, I just want to add, I think it's a great question, and thinking back to that time when, because actually it's funny, I have some other things in common with Charles and Jay. I used to work in telecommunications and actually have more credits in English than I do in psychology, because I didn't really know what I was doing. But, for me, for whatever reason, I was always cognizant of the fact that this time is going to be the only time I'm ever going to get to study anthropology like this. So try to make the most of it. And so some of that probably is intrinsic. I've always been kind of a highly motivated individual and to do the task that I'm doing. And just, if I can just veer off that for a second, some advice I'd have to students, and as well as any job, find the best in that job and learn from it. Even if you don't like it, develop an exit plan, but in the meantime, work really, really hard until you can go. But I think finding that motivation, sometimes you have to make things interesting if they're not automatically interesting. It's easy to do if you do find it interesting, but absent that, I think students need to know that it's important, because that is, what you get, what you earn in your grades, and what you learn is the reflection of the time that you spend there. And that's a big chunk of time, and that really is going to matter to people who see it. So you want to make the most of your time. Have fun too, but make the most of your time.
Thanks, Matt. Jay?
Yeah, I agree with both Matt and Charles. Taking back, going back to when I was in school, motivation, a lot of it can be short term, right? What do you have to get done today? I remember there's been several times when I had no money in my account and I had to go pick up a shift at Finish Line and skip class, right? But to Matt's point, I was very poor at time management. So sometimes I tell this to my team all the time. It's important to always, take one step back before you take two steps forward, right? Taking one step back as a student, assess where you're at. We're in April. I'm sure finals are coming up, right? Where do you need to focus on your time for the bigger picture? What is your big picture goal? What is the motivation behind that? For me, it was family. My mom, my dad, they worked hard. My siblings that were younger, they all looked up to me. So I had to finish and win for them, right? Short term, it was, I need to get money in my account. I need to work and go throw away trash at a construction site to get $50 so I can have some food to eat and gas, right? So it's a delicate balance, and time management plays a lot into that. But goals, you want to make sure that they're timely, they're realistic. And as you're pushing through, know this, you're really close. You're in school, you're really close. You have to put in the time now, and you have to get through these proverbial walls, right? You have to fight through them and succeed and win to get to the next step. And keep that in mind, whether it's your family, your financial goals, your professional goals. I always would tell my team, especially when we're on the road, put a picture of your goal. If you're trying to work hard to get engaged, put a picture of your girlfriend there, right? Or if you want to buy a house, put a picture of a house, right? Or if you have your son or daughter or your cousin, your nephew that you want to be a good example for, put a picture there in your dashboard of your car. So that's my take on that.
Great,
That was
thank
great.
you. Thanks so
Thanks,
much. Are there any other questions or comments? No? Well, thank you, Matt, Jay, and Charles for joining us. We will have you back to P&W once we are back on campus. This was just an amazing conversation, and I was so privileged to be able to chat and ask you questions and hear your stories. So again, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you for having me, Elaine.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Could you stay on for just a few minutes? One of the things, just briefly, and actually we can stop recording.